Hi physics students, this is Mr. Sedita. I'm going to walk you through a series of videos where we're going to do some measurements, practice with length, mass, also do some calculations with volume and density to give you practice with not only measurement skills that otherwise you do in classroom, but also how to put those measurements together to do calculations, to let us figure out other things that we wouldn't normally be able to measure directly, and that's a very powerful skill. So our lab is going to be based around a simple little object. Let me show it to you. It's this little aluminum bar, okay? It has 3 dimensions to it, length, width, and height. So I'll do a separate little video. We'll place this up to a ruler and we'll get those dimensions. Then we'll place it on a electronic balance and get its mass. And then another set of measurements that I'll do for you is we'll look at the dimensions of the room, namely the length and width and the height. We'll do the length and width through a series of measurements, probably with the tiles and counting them. And then the height I'll probably give you, or I might do something differently. So hopefully each video is no longer than a minute. You watch each one, you record your measurements on a sheet, and then you do the calculations. And in the process, you learn some subtleties and important aspects of measurement and then using those calculations. So good luck and enjoy. Okay, so here is our object at hand. I've placed it on the lab table, and I'm going to place a ruler up to it and get its different dimensions. I want you to know where I start on the ruler. I don't necessarily always start at 0, so make adjustments accordingly. And remember, try to go to one place beyond the smallest marking that you can see. All right, so we want to be as precise as possible. So we'll start with the length dimension. Okay, so I'll try my best to line up the 0 with the edge. Okay, and you can see that. So look at the, it would be helpful if I did the centimeter side. Common mistake made. So let's turn that around. Let's get the number of centimeters. So estimate to the best, or not estimate, measure to the best of your ability how many centimeters that is, going down to, in this case, since the smallest division is a 1/10 of a centimeter, we can measure up to 100ths of a centimeter. So I expect you to have some measurement that is out to 2 decimal places. Okay, you'll notice one of the issues with using a camera is something called parallax. In other words, if my camera is not perfectly aligned, squared with the measuring device and the object, it's not necessarily obvious when you're looking at an angle at some of the edges, and it's not obvious where the beginner ends. So that will introduce a little bit of uncertainty to our measurements, but that's all right. Okay, so there's the length. Let me turn it now, and I'll adjust the edge to 0. So you might not necessarily see that in your view, but that's from what I see. It's as close to 0 as I can get. So there is the width. Okay, and if I maybe shift it a little bit, we get rid of some of that parallax. It might be a little more obvious where the right edge is. And then the one that's going to be most difficult is the thickness of this. So I'm going to turn this on its side. I'm going to adjust it with the camera so we don't see a side edge or so it doesn't look tilted. So let me try that again. So I can see the left edge right there. I don't want to be able to do that. So I'm going to shift to the left. So it seems like I'm looking straight down on it. That's decent. And I'm going to line up the ruler with the 0. Okay, it may not look like it's directly over 0, but from my vantage point it is. And this is where we're least certain, so there is our width. Okay, so record those 3 dimensions in centimeters, and then I'm going to ask you to convert those to meters. Okay, so now our next measurement, we're going to look at mass using a electronic balance. It goes out to 1/10 of a gram. We're going to measure in grams, and then eventually we're going to convert to kilograms to get to work on metric conversion. So I'm not just going to measure the mass of one bar because the bars are not all uniform. So I have multiple bars here, and their dimensions are slightly different, and their masses are slightly different. So to get an idea of the average mass, rather than go with one, right? So if I put one on there, it's roughly 33.5 grams, but I won't get that same value for each one. I'm going to put multiple on there, and then we're just going to take an average value. So we're going to add, I have right here with me, 7 bars. So note that there are 7 bars there, okay? And there is the total mass. So record the number of bars, the total mass, and then calculate what the average individual mass is, and then convert that to kilograms. Okay, so the next measurement in our series of measurements, we're going to look at the dimensions of a floor tile. So we're going to use those floor tiles to help us get the dimensions of the classroom. So I've got a picture of the entire tile within this frame. Hopefully you can see the length and width. They are square. So I want to get the length of them in centimeters. Okay, so I'm going to take the edge, put it there and there, and you can see it and you can probably read what this value is right here, but let's zoom in on it so we can get a very precise value. Okay, we are trusting that the edge of the meter stick is on the 0 end, is where it is. Okay, so take time, let me zoom in a little bit better, okay, and get a precise value for the length of one of those tiles. And we will do the same thing for width, where I'm assuming they're the same, but let's make 2 measurements anyway, just to make sure. Okay, so I'm now gonna flip this. You're gonna trust I'm putting it at the right 0 spot. And let me rotate. Okay, and take that reading as well. All right, so we have the length and width of one tile. If we were smart, we would do more, but I'm gonna keep it, we're gonna assume all these tiles are the same. Okay, now, let's do the next. Let's zoom out a little bit, and now we're gonna count the number of tiles starting from one side of the room to the next. So I'm gonna move more to the back. Okay, so we can see this dark line right there where my arc is showing is our beginning. But if we want to take away the influence of counters, let's go underneath this, and we see that beneath the counters is an extra tile and a quarter. Okay, so we're going to add 1 1/4 to our 0 line. So I'm not going to count for you. I'm just going to walk slowly. So again, this dark line here is 0 if we start at the edge of the table. You're going to eventually add 1 1/4 to that based on what I showed us underneath. So let me turn. Okay. And I'll walk slowly, and you can do the counting. Okay, so now we're getting to the edge of the counter there, and we can see that's not obvious. So this last one is roughly another 1/4 of a tile. So add that to your count if you haven't already added that in. And then we know there's tiles behind it, so there's width behind it. So let's add a 1 1/4 again. So we have 1 1/4 on each end, plus the number of tiles you counted. Now, we're gonna go from front to back. I'm gonna choose sorry, this is making you dizzy. So let's choose a place to start in the back. So we have a 1/2 tile right there. Add to that 1 1/4. And then right where I put my foot, that's our 0 line for us to start counting additional ones. So again, we've added a 1/2 plus 1 1/4 for what's behind the lab tables. Now let's go forward. Try to be steady. Mr. Bowling Ball. And we'll get to here, and we'll call that 1 full tile when there's nothing behind the wall. So we don't need to make any additional measurements or tiles for the front of the room. Okay. All right, so the last of our series of measurements is going to be the height of the room. We're going to do this indirectly by looking at the height of each cinder block along the wall and then multiply that by the number of cinder blocks. So let's count first. We'll start at the bottom of the floor. So our first block will go from here all the way up to here. Okay, so that's 1. And I'll slowly move up. And then at the very top, okay, where the conduit goes in the ceiling, we'll call that 1/2 a cinder block. So hopefully you were able to see, count the total number. And now let's play a meter stick up here and get the height of 1. So I'm going to put 0 at the top edge of this block right here, and then let's go down to the bottom edge, whoops, right there for our measurement. So let me square up that. Okay, so it's not obvious where it ends, so you have to make a guesstimation there, and then multiply that by the number of blocks that you counted earlier.